You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. So we've made it to a Thursday, Rod, and no invasion yet. That's all. I'm just saying that the invasion was supposed to be yesterday. We didn't have the invasion yesterday. And I thought they might have been running a little late, but turns out doesn't seem like there's going to be an invasion. Does it seem that way to you, Rod?
It's a long, imminent invasion. It's just a long, imminent.
It's been imminent since 2014, if you look at the Washington Post. They've been predicting this for a long time. And you know what? The administration is still predicting it. We'll talk about that. We had a great show today. Coming up in about 15 minutes. Somewhere between 10 and 15, 13, I don't know. Next, because it's already midnight in Moscow. Is that correct, Rod?
That's correct, yeah.
It's 12 midnight in Moscow, Russia right now. Great invasion time, by the way. That would really surprise everybody. If they did it right during our show, that'd be great. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. And I say unfortunately only because you know who'd really like a Russian invasion is, I bet, a lot of Ukrainians, Rod. Do you get that impression sometimes?
Say that one more time.
You get the impression sometimes there are quite a few Ukrainians all around the country. Some of them would hate it, but some of them would welcome Russian rule. Do you get that impression?
A little bit, but not really.
Well, I'll tell you, if you look at the people in Crimea, they were thrilled. And I got a woman who follows me on Twitter, and she was, I'll put it like this. About 750,000 people in eastern Ukraine have opted to get Russian dual citizenship. You saw that, right?
Yeah, I did see that. Eastern Ukraine is a very hostile place for the Ukrainians against other Ukrainians. I don't know how else to say it.
No, right. So here's what I'm saying. Imagine 750,000 Americans opted for dual Canadian citizenship right now. That would tell you that they really like Justin Trudeau's haircut or something. You see my point. But I think it's very indicative that a lot of people, and we're going to talk about this actually, because I want to talk about the fishy thing about the U.S. moving its embassy, and then Ukrainians actually moving from Kiev to Lviv. I never know how to pronounce it. That's one of the reasons we need Mark Sloboda on in about 10 minutes to start the show. Then next hour, first off, Carter Laren is joining us as co-host all next hour, as it's a Carter Thursday. Then we're going to talk to Ford Fisher, right? At the bottom of the hour, correct? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, that's correct. When we talked to Ford for a little bit.
Now, I realized something, and I'm just going to get it out of the way now, Rod, that you set me up to sound like I'm doing a newscast about presidents in the 70s. Because think about it. I've got Ford and Carter.
That's true. You got a wrestler at the end, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Right. So Austin Pelly will be joining us up from Ottawa for the final 15 minutes. We want to get a quick report because Austin's been good enough to give us a lot of his time, an hour this week already. And for God's sakes, as anyone who's been married to me knows, an hour with me goes a long way. And so we'll have him on for 15 minutes. But Ford and Carter at the end of the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory. Did you know that when you were setting up the show that we had Ford and Carter? Did you see that?
No, I didn't really pay attention to that part.
It didn't occur to me till I was thinking about introing them when I would say Ford, Carter, Carter, Ford. And it sounds like I'm just reciting presidents from the 70s, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, Ford's not really, if we were talking to the real Gerald Ford, I'd call him out on that's not his real name.
What's his real name?
You caught me off guard, but I think it's like Stanley or Stacy or something like that. And it's just not his real name.
That's funny. Well, if it's Stacy, well, I'm just curious now. I'm curious now. But the point is, we have Carter Laren for the whole hour, then Ford Fisher from News to Share. Ford goes around and covers a lot of big events, and he's coming on right before Austin. Maybe he's got a tip or two for the people up in Ottawa. And I wonder if where is Ford? Is he in the country now, or did he head up to Canada?
I believe he's in D.C. He's actually off today, so I believe he's in D.C.
Okay, because would it have shocked you if he'd gone up to Canada? It wouldn't have shocked me one bit. That's what he does for a living. He goes where the news is. So we'll be talking to Ford Fisher. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Ford's gotten a little bit bigger, so he kind of, he has other people that film it, and then he just, puts his trademark and, obviously probably pays them.
He's got stringers, you're saying. He's no longer a working man, you're saying. You're accusing him of being the bourgeoisie. Is that what you're doing?
No, I'm just saying he's succeeded to where he doesn't have to go as many places, and so he's moved up the ladder a little bit.
Yeah, I kept thinking in my own video production career that I would eventually hit a point in my career when I wouldn't have to lift bags of heavy things anymore. Because a lot of video production is you've got a bag and it's got a lot of heavy stuff in it. Maybe it's batteries or whatever, sandbags. And I kept thinking, I'll eventually hit a point where I won't be the one who has to carry heavy stuff. I'll have someone to do it. It never happened. Up till the end of me doing video production on any serious scale, I was carrying heavy stuff at every point. I could never officially farm all of that out. So I'm just saying. Now, we're looking forward to Mark Svoboda because there's a lot of stuff going on. And again, we pointed this out yesterday. Russia is now actively trolling the U.S. And for instance, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs is saying, right up on their Twitter website, it's another day of non-invasion, they're saying. Did you see that by any chance?
Yeah, I saw there was a tweet, or I guess you say a meme of John Travolta from Pulp Fiction just looking around and can't find anything.
Wait, what do we got? Saul?
Brave has a question for you. Did you want to take it?
Wait, who is it?
Brave from Atlanta.
Oh, Brave from Atlanta. Okay, forgive me. I heard the vowel sound. I couldn't get any consonants for some reason. Let's do that because we got a couple minutes here. Brave from Atlanta, 202-521-1320. Hey, Brave, what's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on, Lee? I know you're going to have Austin on later, and maybe another guest that's familiar with the trucker situation over in Canada. I was hoping that you could ask them or bring up. So on By Any Means Necessary, they had this was yesterday. They had a guest on. I didn't catch the whole thing. I only caught a portion of it, but it did kind of poke my interest. This particular guest was raising the point that the organizer of the truckers is was I don't know, based in some supposedly based in some far right wing group that had organized some event. I guess years before, and they I guess also brought up that a large amount of the funds that was being raised for the truckers was being funded from the U.S. And I guess he would, and this is not so much the host of the By Any Means Necessary show, but more so the guests. I think he was saying that it was justified in taking the money because of the fact that these funds were being donated by right-wing groups largely from the U.S. And then one other point was that
Well, let me just say this to that bootlicker, whoever that was, saying it to them. Hey, guess what? Be careful what you ask for, because guess what? Next time they start taking money, it's not going to be from a right-wing group. It'll be from you, commie. Got it? So I'm just saying, I'm assuming it was a commie. And I just want to say that anybody who thinks that the state is just going to take it from groups they don't like is foolish. You see what I'm saying, Brave? In a somewhat spazzy way?
No, I totally agree. I was at work at the time, so I couldn't call in, which is why I only caught a portion of the show. But I found it to be, I don't know, I find it to be kind of weird because I would think that they would be in full support, and anyone coming on would be in full support of actions against the state. You know, any protests, and especially would be against the state taking funds illegally like that in that fashion. But because the guest, and again, I want to stress that this was mainly the guest making this point, because the guest was saying that they were supposedly supported by far right-wing groups and it was assembled by far right-wing groups. I guess that it was justifying that just doesn't seem right to me. I haven't seen anything from these guys.
But I want to point out to a lot of these people, anybody from Mitch McConnell on over is a far right-winger. So first off, and I say this, I'm very comfortable saying this because you've heard me, Brave, on the show. If some people call someone from the left a commie and they're not, I stop them. And I say, I don't believe that's the case. So I'm going to say this. Stop being sloppy with the term far right wing. You know, I've called out the Nazis in Ukraine. If you want to call them far right wing, that's fine. By the way, I don't happen to think National Socialists, that's who Nazis are, fit into the normal spectrum of left-right as I understand the term. I'm a teenage libertarian, not teenage now, but I'm from that school of libertarianism that sees the spectrum as liberty on one side and statism on the other side. And on that one, over on the statism side, you have both people who are traditionally called far right, even like Nazis, because they're statists. Clearly, Nazis are authoritarian statists. That's one of the reasons I oppose them. But I oppose far-left communism for the same reason. It's statist and authoritarian. And anybody who's trying to delude themselves that life is an easy bowl of cherries where you don't have to work under socialism or communism is kidding themselves. You don't know anything about history. And I'll put it like this. Even when you look at other countries that have a socialist ideology, they don't have, it's not like their economy is better. It really isn't. For some people, it might be better. Like if you're homeless or something like that, you might look at a place where there's no such thing as homelessness. But when you're rich and you're kind of living one step above what people in the U.S. would consider the poverty line or at the poverty line, dirt floor, that kind of thing, I don't know if that's better. So when I hear somebody say far right wing, I'm not picking on you, Brave. Hopefully, Brave, do you feel picked on?
No, I expected I explained myself pretty well, so I get that you.
No, you did, and I'm not. If I'm hollering here, it's not at you. I appreciate you. You know this. I appreciate your calls all the time. But I'm just saying to people, be careful what you call far right wing, because a lot of times, does that make sense, Brave?
I'm fine. My emotions are intact. I'm good.
No. I'm not worried about you. I'm asking if my point makes sense to you, that
it does.
That sometimes when people talk about far right, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's my point. I didn't think you were triggered or anything, Brave. I wasn't worried about that. But thanks.
Not at all. Not at all. I was hoping you could bring that up. Not again, because you didn't hear this yourself for yourself. So, but maybe if you could ask the question about the funds possibly, and have they seen anything like this? Not that far right Nazi crap, because I don't believe in that. I don't believe that. But about it being set up by the contributing groups that organized. Is there any truth to that or any information on that? Because I don't know. I don't believe so, but I don't know. I don't want to say that it's not true without knowing. So,
there's nothing that would shock me about a lot of Americans seeing what's going on in Canada and wanting to help those truckers out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. In other words, if the idea is that there's a lot of money coming from America, good. Because I believe that completely. But we got to go to a break. Great call, Brave. As usual, I'm glad I didn't trigger you, by the way. 202-521-1320. Let's go to a short break. When we come back straight out of Moscow, Mark Sloboda will be joining us right after this on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back here on The Backstory, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Joining us now, straight out of Moscow, great friend of the show, and exactly the person you want to be talking to in the midst of this non-invasion, Mark Sloboda. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Hey, Lee, thanks for having me on. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Backstory.
It's always great to have you on. Now, let me ask you, because you've helped me with pronunciation in the past. So this one I never get. So there's Kiev, right? The Ukrainians like to say Kyiv. But then over in the western part, it's spelled like Kiev, but it's like Lviv. How do you say that western Ukrainian city that sort of looks like Kiev?
Lvov or Lviv?
Lviv? Is that it?
Close enough.
Okay. Well, I'll take close enough, because I know I don't even say Khodorkovsky right. It's like Hordakovsky, right? It's the K's silent.
Khodorkovsky.
Yeah, see, again, this is why you live there and I don't. I wouldn't be allowed in for pronunciation alone. But the U.S. moved its embassy personnel to Lviv, right? That
Not
happened
just the
a few
embassy.
days.
The
Yes.
CIA station office in Ukraine as well.
And then recently, the Ukrainians themselves moved something from Kiev over there, right? What did they move?
There are rumors. I wouldn't consider them substantiated that they are considering an evacuation of the Zelensky regime presidency and the Rada there, if there is an intervention. But I would presume that they do have such plans, but I haven't heard anyone official discuss them yet.
Well, let me tell you why I asked, because you know the situation there in Ukraine very, very well. I think what may possibly be going on is that there could be a plan underway ultimately to ditch central and eastern Ukraine entirely and just to form a breakaway U.S.-controlled region in western Ukraine that Lviv would be the capital of, basically. And part of the reason I say that, it seems to me that when Yanukovych was elected and then his presidency was overthrown in 2014 by the U.S., that at this point, the Ukrainian people, in other words, if there were an election tomorrow, Zelensky's not very popular. Poroshenko's back. He was hugely unpopular. And Zelensky's running, what I last saw in the polling there, is right now Zelensky and Poroshenko are about 22% approval with people in Ukraine. And what that seems to mean to me is it's a freaking mess over in Ukraine. And the U.S. knows it. And they know that in an election, they can't necessarily control that. Whereas they can just bisect the country, balkanize it, as it were, and have a Western Ukraine breakaway nation, the U.S. would have a much better chance of controlling that breakaway Western part than Ukraine that exists currently. What do you think about that, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think the regime in Kiev would ever willingly sacrifice central and even much of East Ukraine. They might, under certain circumstances, be compelled to ditch Donbass. I mean, it's been suggested before that they really don't want another 5 to 6 million, quote, pro-Russia, anti-Maidan voters back into the country, that they couldn't absorb them politically. It would change the balance of power in the country. I think a more likely scenario for what you're suggesting is if Russia did intervene, they might restrict their intervention to really no further than Kiev. That would leave a rump West Ukrainian state that Russia would be, if they intervene, would be, I think, suicidal to move into, because their resistance to their presence would be very high, near to 100%, whereas in East Ukraine it would be, well, significantly lower. And that would basically leave a rump West Ukrainian state that Russia would, not try, would try to expel, because I don't believe that Russia would try to absorb Ukraine. They would do what the U.S. did when they put help push the Maidan to overthrow the government in 2014. Russia would push their own favorable government into Kiev in its place, kind of reversing the regime change. But they might be willing to ditch West Ukraine in such a scenario, because it would be extremely problematic for them politically.
Now, you still think, I just saw this on Twitter the other day, you were saying that, and so I want people to be clear where you are, Mark Slavoda, on this. You still think some military intervention on the part of Russia in Ukraine is possible? And
yes, I think it's an option on the table. Yes.
Yes. And what do you think? Do you think there would have to be something to trigger that, specifically like serious shelling in the Donbass? Or what, do you think someone would have to trigger that, or is it? Or what do you think, Mark?
From my personal opinion, I mean, the regime in Kiev has been shelling, whether we're talking mortars, artillery, grenades, sniper fire, the people of East Ukraine and Donbass for the last, since 2014. There's some 14,000 dead. And despite them trying to depict it as a Russian-Ukrainian war, it is a civil conflict. It is the forces of the regime that seized power in Kiev killing the people of East Ukraine in an attempt to force them to finally accept their seizure of power in 2014, and which happened in Kiev. They want them to accept it in East Ukraine. And yes, of course, Russia is assisting the people of Donbass, with training and funding and arming on one side, and NATO is training, arming, and funding the regime in Kiev on the other. It's a civil conflict inside a proxy conflict. But because of that death toll, we're looking at that. That is, what they would call in Syria a regime killing its own people, mass murdering its own people. I think that's casus belli. I think there has been, just cause for a Russian intervention since then. In fact, I argued for it at the time. And I think such an intervention has become incredibly more difficult and costly in the years since then, and achieved very little, with the regime in Kiev still refusing to implement the Minsk Accords that they and everyone else supposedly agreed to and was enshrined in a UN Security Council resolution. There is the idea that they would need some bigger event. Well, really, all they have to do is focus the news on what happens, if not on a daily, then on a weekly basis there, because there is enough, horror of living under, continual artillery fire, living half in and out of your basement. If you remember, back in 2015, the Candy oligarch who was then the leader of the Kiev regime, Petro Poroshenko, he spoke, openly. He was speaking to his own on television, and he said, "This is how we'll win this war. Our children will go to school. Their children will sit huddled in basements." And that tells you the mentality of that right there. To me, that's just cause. If it is decided that something more is needed, perhaps all they really need to do is focus on the horrors of what is already happening.
Now, and that was, you mentioned the UN, but today in the UN, we got some new headlines. The initial headlines were that Russia was putting forth stuff about what's going on in the Donbass at the UN. Then here in the West, in America and so on, that quickly turned around to be, we're going after Russia at the UN. But Russia had started this by appealing to the UN, basically, and saying crimes are being committed. And I noticed the Wall Street Journal, when they reported this, they put the word crimes in scare quotes, like it might not be actual crimes. Possible it's not, according to the Wall Street Journal. But what's happening? This is something the U.S. is trying to bring this case at the UN, that there are crimes being committed. And they've got a very good case, don't they, Mark?
Well, I mean, you don't really even have to trust the Russian government on that, because even if you want to take the word, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, hardly friends of the Russian government, have detailed war crimes, what they consider to be war crimes by the Kiev regime, by particularly the far right, the ultranationalist and Banderite fascist militias that have fought on their behalf in East Ukraine. I mean, that's well documented. So I don't think there's any question that there is plenty of evidence of war crimes involved. And it's not to say that it's simply on the Kiev regime side. The truth of any conflict is it's almost impossible to conduct a conflict without committing some sorts of war crimes, right? Because the definitions are very broad, and if you're using artillery into any urban area, you're basically already treading that line. But I think that there is much more substantial and hate ideologically motivated crimes from the side of these militias that have fought on behalf of the Kiev regime.
Now, let's talk quickly, because there was a lot of foreign leaders heading into Moscow. For instance, we had Macron come in there. We had this woman, Liz Truss, who's the foreign minister in the UK, go over there. This morning, there was an Italian foreign minister over there, right? I saw some of that press conference this morning. But it seems to me part of what's going on here is with Angela Merkel gone in Germany, leadership in Europe, Macron is kind of the old guy on the block at this point. He's kind of the seasoned, experienced leader. And it seems like Macron is trying to position himself and France. And we'll talk about that submarine thing and how that affected them as well, that kerfuffle with the U.S., Great Britain, and Australia about submarines. But it seems like Macron went into Moscow and is trying to take credit to do you think I'm right that Macron wants to position himself as a leader? Mark?
I think Macron, like so many French leaders, has a little bit of a Napoleon conflict, and it expresses itself in him with the idea that he believes he's some type of grand statesman, and that France is a country that really, matters in international relations when it's really doesn't matter a whole lot anymore. But he is facing a heated re-election campaign in France, where he himself is polling no more than 20-some, low 20s%. And a foreign policy victory where he is seen as some type of grand statesman returning with a foreign policy victory would be a big help to his political campaign back home. So I think you can understand that that's where a good deal of Macron's motivation comes from. But there has been kind of a tag team of shuttle diplomacy between Macron and Olaf Scholz, the new chancellor of Germany. They've basically taken turns. Olaf Scholz came to the U.S., Macron went to Russia, and then the other way around. And they both went to Kiev as well. And my reading of this is there have been some backroom negotiations brokered by France and Germany. I would be very surprised if the U.S. wasn't at least in on it. Europeans have very limited foreign policy agency with the U.S., but is laying low. The statements out of Olaf Scholz confirm this. They say that Kiev is going to start implementing the Minsk Accords finally. They were signed in 2015 and have been unimplemented since. And one of the most basic things is that the Donbass republics, there's supposed to be changes to the Ukrainian constitution pushed through the Rada, their parliament, that would grant a federative status, a kind of a special autonomous status to the Donbass, at least, possibly some other areas of Ukraine. That would, in effect, allow Donbass, as well as protecting their political, culture, and language rights, it would give them a veto over Ukraine joining NATO. All right, they wouldn't be able to join any Russian-led military organization like the CSTO either, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or something like that. But it would basically solve the problem of NATO expansion, at least when it came to Ukraine. NATO wouldn't have to close the door. The regime in Kiev wouldn't have to say that they're closing the door. The people of East Ukraine themselves would close the door because, once they had, some modicum of their political voices and rights restored to them that were, taken away with the overthrow of the government that they had elected in 2014. The Minsk Accords would be a full implementation of the Minsk Accords would be a way out of this. It would allow everyone to save some sort of face. The problem with it is, though, it would cause an ultra-nationalist backlash in Ukraine, and Zelensky would be facing, I don't know what we want to call it, a second, a third, a fourth Maidan. The numbering is always a little weird. But they would turn against Zelensky. And then Zelensky would, face having his whole regime collapse without, the far-right support. Not only support, they'd actively turn on him. And that would cause a big mess. And that puts Zelensky in a bit of a hard place. Does he want his country to burn from an ultra-nationalist Maidan? Or does he want it to burn from a Russian military intervention? It's not an enviable position, And unfortunately, despite him being a comedian and all, it's not really a laughing matter.
Now, speaking of not a laughing matter, our Secretary of State is Tony Blinken.
That is a laughing matter. That is a laughing matter. Sorry, it makes me laugh.
Well, let's get ready, Saul. Let's get that clip. Let's hear Antony Blinken and his words of wisdom. Maybe you'll disagree. Maybe you'll feel differently. Maybe you'll gain newfound respect for Tony Blinken after this clip, Mark Slobota. Hit it, Saul.
First, Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for its attack. This could be a violent event that Russia will blame on Ukraine, or an outrageous accusation that Russia will level against the Ukrainian government. We don't know exactly the form it will take. It could be a fabricated so-called terrorist bombing inside Russia, the invented discovery of a mass grave, a staged drone strike against civilians, or a fake, even a real, attack using chemical weapons. Russia may describe this event as ethnic cleansing or a genocide, making a mockery of a concept that we in this chamber do not take lightly, nor do I take lightly, based on my family history. In the past few days, Russian media has already begun to spread some of these false alarms and claims to maximize public outrage, to lay the groundwork for an invented justification for war. Today, that drumbeat is only intensified in Russia's state-controlled media. We've heard some of these basic allegations from Russian-backed speakers here today. Second, in response to this manufactured provocation, the highest levels of the Russian government may theatrically convene emergency meetings to address the so-called crisis. The government will issue proclamations declaring that Russia must respond to defend Russian citizens or ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Next, the attack is planned to begin. Russian missiles and bombs will drop across Ukraine. Communications will be jammed. Cyber attacks will shut down key Ukrainian institutions. After that, Russian tanks and soldiers will advance on key targets that have already been identified and mapped out in detailed plans.
Well, so Mark, it sounds like what you were laying out there, right? In other words, it sounds like you were on the show here on Radio Sputnik, on Russian-funded media, spreading this baseless allegation that there's ethnic cleansing going on in eastern Ukraine, and now Russia's going to manufacture an attack based apparently on stuff you said on the show. Is that what's going on here, Mark?
Yeah, except that it's accurate, and he's whitewashing.
Well, he's lying.
Yeah.
What Antony Blinken's doing there is completely acting as though what's happening in eastern Ukraine is not happening in eastern Ukraine. That basically it's a nice... People are trying to celebrate Unity Day and whatever the Ukrainian equivalent of Chuck E. Cheese is, right? They're just having a grand old time, and Russia's making up this stuff, that there's nothing going on. If there's nothing going on, why have 750,000 Ukrainians gotten Russian? And let me ask you that, Mark, directly. Why do you think 750,000 Ukrainians have taken Russia up on the offer to become Russian citizens? Why are they doing that?
Because they're afraid of the regime that seized power in their country in 2014, and they want some modicum of protection for their personal rights. That's why. There are some 3 to 4 million Ukrainian refugees that fled to Russia, to aggressor Russia. Why? Because the regime that seized power in Kiev came and tried to extend its power over eastern Ukraine as well. Antony Blinken does lay out a very good plan, like a very good scenario. And as I was listening to it, I'm like, wow, this sounds exactly what the U.S. does every time it goes to war. This sounds like a monumental feat of projection to me. That the U.S., well, we don't know exactly what they would do. It could be this, it could be this. Most of it is he's mentioning things that are happening or have happened, which is ironic. But, he's like, Well, this is what we would do. that was the feeling I got listening to Antony Blinken. And you have to admit, if there's anyone who would know false flag scenarios, creating a pretext for a military intervention, it is the U.S. government. I mean, when's the last time they went to war without one? Whether you want to go back to remember the Maine and the Spanish-American War, up to the Gulf of Tonkin, to the weapons of mass destruction in Iran, Kuwaiti incubator babies being ripped out of hospitals, to a genocide in Libya. You want to remember that just a few years ago. To Colin Powell holding up, suspicious Coke vials or whatever they were at the UN Security Council, a former U.S. Secretary of State. If there's anyone that knows false flags as pretext, you have to admit it's a U.S. Secretary of State.
But you do know, you're there in Moscow, Mark. You know that Vladimir Putin, he talked about jamming communications. Vladimir Putin has shut down 4 TV stations and jailed somebody who owns one of those. Wait, hang on. That's not Putin who did that? Who did that? That was Ukraine.
That was the comedian in Kiev. That was Zelensky, yes. Not only he's actually charged both of his political opponents on either side, not just Viktor Medvedchuk, the head of the so-called pro-Russian opposition bloc of East Ukraine, but he's also charged his predecessor, who heads the so-called European Solidarity Party, the candy oligarch Petro Poroshenko, with the same politicized treason charges, which is ironic because Poroshenko charged his predecessor, Yanukovych, with treason as well. It just, every Ukrainian just accuses everyone else of treason at this point. Zelensky has shut down 6 television stations, every major media outlet, online or in print, that is critical of his government. But democracy, right? Because any criticism of him is pro-Russian treason. I guess even if it comes from Petro Poroshenko.
And by the way, how many I assume you get whatever Moscow Metro cable, I don't know what the hell it is over there, but how many TV stations has Putin shut down recently this year?
Well, none. I mean, not this year, certainly. I mean, that wasn't really the way things happen here. Television stations in Russia a lot of them were previously owned by oligarchs, as they are in Ukraine currently, because Ukraine never got rid of its oligarchs. And a lot of them were taken more into kind of these public partnerships since then. But there still are privately owned channels in Russia as well on television stations. It's, you don't quite have the Fox, MSNBC, Coke, Pepsi rivalry taking place on your television stations, but I don't really consider that worthwhile news. It's just political theater to me. So,
well, it is political theater, because let's point out that, I know you know this, but Coke and Pepsi, I know some people like to pretend they're different, but they're both brown sugar water, basically. They're the same, right? And so Fox and MSNBC people, I was listening to Fox right before the show started today. They are towing the anti-Russian, anti-Putin line just as hard as MSNBC would. They had Michael McFaul, who hates Trump, by the way, over as a guest, an honored guest over on Fox. So you're right. It is a Coke and Pepsi, because at the end of the day, they're exactly the same.
Michael McFaul was also on Russian radio this morning speaking. So much for, the idea that there's no Russians were completely able to listen to Michael McFaul speaking to Russian radio on Russian radio this morning and hear his bloviating American exceptionalist opinion. So the Russians get a chance to hear McFaul too.
And Michael McFaul's got me blocked on Twitter, so it's hard for me to hear him. because he's literally got me blocked on Twitter because I said something to get him upset. I didn't even talk about his mother or anything. I just said something, and he blocked me. Shows you how tough he is. But Mark Sleboda, great appearance as always. Thanks so much for joining us. It's late there, so have a good night. Say hi to the crows, say hi to the wife and everything. This is Mark Sleboda. Coming up after this, we're taking your call, 202-521-1320. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know.
But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, there's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back on The Backstory. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is a show that takes you to the truth behind the headlines. And sometimes we got to get a big machete out because there's a lot of chopping we need to do to get to the truth behind the headlines. Because seriously, it has been a pretty intense few weeks in terms of the heaping tonnage of BS that's been thrown at everybody right now. So it's very hard to stay on top of all that, but stay on top of that is our job, so we try to do it. 202-521-1320. Tarif, I see I'll get to you in 1 second. I want to remind people of one thing, because of all this tonnage of BS that's been coming. About a week ago, a story was reported. Ron Wyden up in Oregon, a Democrat, and I'll talk about why that's important in 1 second, because it is. And it's very interesting. People need to watch out for this. Put out paperwork showing declassified papers that the CIA has been spying on American citizens. Now, Rod, you saw that, right? Remember that story?
And I think what you're getting at is that all of this, or let me put an allegation out there that I think what you're trying to say is that all of this is trying to cover up the spying from the CIA.
Right. No one's covering it. And I did see somebody on the right going, well, we just have Wyden's word for it. No, we don't, you moron. Not you, Rod. But whoever said this to me on Twitter, as they said in Animal House, you moron, what are you thinking? Wyden put out paperwork. You saw the paperwork, right, Rod, that was not an illusion, correct?
No, there's no reason to make this a partisan thing. It's actually a good thing that Ron Wyden would put this out there.
Right. And he's the only one putting it out. So now some knuckleheads on the right, by the way, chief knucklehead amongst them, Mitch McConnell. Did you see McConnell praising Biden for his handling of Russia yesterday, Rod?
No, not yesterday's, but he's been giving Biden and the Democrats a lot of praise these last couple of weeks, though.
Right, he has, and he did it yesterday, too. Mitch McConnell, you've got to go, Mitch. You and Roger Wicker need to take a long vacation. I hear Kiev is nice on January 1st. You can grab a tiki torch, jump right in the parade with the Nazis. But I really am bothered by the fact that some people, because it's coming from Ron Wyden, a Democrat up in Oregon, they're pretending as though it's not a real story. No, the CIA's been spying on Americans. We know about it from declassified documents. It's not just an allegation. By the way, why would a Democrat make that allegation willy-nilly? Like, why? No one even thinks through that. But 202-521-1320, Tarif, thanks for holding briefly there. I wanted to remind everybody again about that CIA thing. Don't let that drop. Don't let your vigilance down. Although it never got really in the news cycle, let's remember that that's out there, and it's a huge freaking story. Go ahead, Tarif.
Okay. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, and also I have two comments. First comment dealing with seemed like they probably had a bank run yesterday in Canada. You start have like 3 or 4 major banks start having troubles with the internet. Some people surmise that it might be the government shutting down the bank so nobody won't withdraw any money. My second comment is dealing with Ukraine. I was listening to Alex McCurris, and he brought up the same thing you and Saborda was talking about, but he gave different scenarios what could happen. The first scenario was y'all saying that they could move the government to the west part of Ukraine. That could cause problems, and you might have. He said they might have deserters in the military. And once you have deserters in the military, and you have different government officers joining different sides. You can Ukraine can become just like Afghanistan, and it's almost like as if the U.S. is trying to force Russia to step in to try to take care of it, to put more economic stresses on them to get them in a quagmire like they've been in a quagmire before in Afghanistan 30 years ago. And the second solution, the second thing he said that could happen is, okay, since I've been reading reports the past 30 minutes, they picked up shelling on the Donbass line again. And you can have a war breakout where you can have troops going into Donbass, fighting the Donbass Republic, forcing Russia's hand to fight the Ukrainian army. Then the U.S. will impose sanctions on Russia, but the sanctions won't amount to anything because the German business people is really getting their voices known, is really speaking up, talking about they want to still trade with Russia and speculate with the Russian debt and all that. So the sanctions won't amount to anything. Nord Stream 2 will probably be canceled, but later on put back online once they realize they need the gas. So basically, Russia, they'll suffer for a little bit, but not that long. So that's the options he was giving. There was one more option he said, but I forgot what the third option was. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, great call as usual, Tarif, and you bring up a good point. Now, Rod, let me bounce this off of you, because I've got another idea that's going to prove exactly why I am not in any position in the Russian government, because I make stupid suggestions. But here's what my idea is, and this is, like a lot of my ideas, it's stupid, but it's half not stupid, or there's some percentage of it that's not stupid. I'm on to something here. I'll tell you what I think Russia should do, okay? I think they should give people, the way Ukraine gave people flags for Unity Day yesterday, do you know what Russia should give people? Webcams and phones with good cameras. in Donbass and eastern Ukraine. And some of them, particularly the Ukrainian honeys, OnlyFans accounts. But that's the stupid part. But here's my point, Rod. If they, because, you know, there are some Ukrainian honeys. You've seen them, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Right. So there we go. But here's what the idea is. I think if people there were broadcasting on a network like VK, which is Russian-controlled, so it's not going to be shut down, and then they said, we want you to see, like, in other words, I want them to make it easy for people over there to broadcast when the shelling starts, what they're facing. Does that make sense? Like, overwhelm the airwaves with that. And they would get kicked off YouTube quickly, but don't use YouTube. Use VK or something. You see my stupid / not stupid idea, Rod?
No, I'm with you. I just saw a tweet from, we've had Dean O'Brien, I think at least 2 or 3 times on the show. There's speaking of Ukrainian onions, there's a beautiful Ukrainian woman whose face was blown up by some type of shelling that had happened, I guess, yesterday. And so, I mean, this is real life problems happening every day for them. And, you know, they're being lied about and saying it's something that it's not.
And speaking of Ukrainian honeys, I mentioned this before, but I don't mean, by the way, when I say Ukrainian honeys, there's no disrespect. If you're good looking, I respect you right off the bat because, you know, again, I'm not knocking it. But there was a woman, and she's there, and yesterday she got her Russian citizenship in the form of a passport, and she posted the picture, and she looked so happy, and she looked like, I'm going to say a model, not a supermodel. What I mean by that is she was not overly, you know how supermodels a lot of times when you see them, Rod, they've got a lot of makeup on. You know what I'm talking about. It's not
It changes their facial features.
Not the natural look is what I'm getting at. But this woman had a very natural, she had a natural beauty, and she looked so happy holding up her Russian visa that it was like an ad for Russian visas. You follow me? If they just were out there on the blockchain, we could all buy them. But she was so happy. And I think the overjoyed people, I tagged Biden in a tweet back to her. And she was someone who already followed me. And that was nice of her. But I thought it was so moving, actually, because she was so thrilled. And that's what I've noticed. When you look at the footage, anybody, go look at the footage of the people in Crimea in 2014. Because don't forget, there were 2 referendums. They voted first to be independent of Ukraine. Remember that? That was first, Rod.
Right.
Then they voted to join Russia. You follow me? It wasn't like one move. It happened in a couple of different steps there. And the independence one, that should have been the sign, hey, these people are moving out. You follow me? And if you want to get back together, maybe it's time to talk to them. And Russia said that today, basically, that Ukraine brought this on themselves by not engaging in dialogue, and they're absolutely right. And let's take a short break. When we come back, Carter Laren's joining us for the next hour. Then we got Fort Fisher at the bottom of the hour. Then Austin Pelley up in Ottawa at the end of the hour, right here on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we're back. It is time for the second hour today on a Thursday of the best damn radio show in the world. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Want to thank once again Mark Sloboda for joining us last hour. Always a great talk with Mark. Joining us this hour as co-host, because it's every other Thursday. It's another other Thursday. So Carter Laren is joining us as guest host. Hey, Carter, you there?
Yeah, how you doing, Lee?
Hey, Carter, welcome. Good to talk to you again. And
you too. Thanks for coming on our show the other day, by the way.
Oh, that was great. I thank Carrie, your co-host, last week for that. That was great. It was great to be on the show. That was coffee break. How do you say that, Carter?
We say kofefi, but I hear there's many ways to pronounce it. So
right,
yeah.
It's that whatever the hell Trump was doing.
It was the Trump mistweet or what that was. And we just embraced it and decided to call our show Kofefi Break.
There we go. So there's no official pronunciation guide. I looked it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. It's not there. So
yeah.
Kofiv rhymes with Lviv. Sort of sounds like Kiev. There we go. Carter Laren is with us from Unsafe Space for the entire hour. Joining us at the bottom of the hour, Ford Fisher. Then 15 minutes to him. Then up to Ottawa, where Austin Pelly is again. And we're just doing it for 15 minutes. That and more, 202-521-1320 is the number to call on The Backstory. And Carter, I'm going to quickly get to Karen in Maryland on the call, because otherwise I'll forget.
Sure.
And I'll say something else, too, because I noticed this, and I apologize to everyone watching on video, first off, for the way I look in general. But second off, you know what happened is a few months ago, I got myself a very comfortable one of those gaming chairs. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. They're like thrones.
So I got myself a nice
gamers.
Right. They are like thrones for gamers, except they're very soft and cushy. And what happens is, because we're now in the second hour of the show, see, what I need for a chair, Carter, is like 1961 East Berlin Stasi waiting room. You know, a stiff metal chair.
Just to keep you awake,
and
or what?
And the reason, no, well, it's awake and also with good posture. Because what happens in the comfortable chair, I start to shift back in the chair. Like I noticed yesterday, like I see myself now, briefly, on video, and I'm slouched back. I'm comfy in my chair, so I settle into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and then I look like Jabba the Hutt when I look over.
You know, I used to stand to do shows for a little while.
The talk show host Tom Likas, who I used to listen to. Tom would do that. He would do the show standing. And here's the thing, because I've had strokes and stuff like that, I worry. I'm already on pills to keep me from falling over. And most of the time I feel like I'm going to fall over. And I'm not even joking, but it's really true. I'm off kilter, off balance, pretty much all the time now since my strokes. I pointed out, I feel a little almost tipsy all the time without any of the pleasurable effects of being tipsy. Just the off-balance part. Yeah.
Well, that's sitting sounds better for you then.
It is. And as the Rolling Stones said, what a drag it is getting old. But let's quickly go, because otherwise I will forget Karen. Because I love talking to you, Carter. That's one of the reasons you're on as guest host. Always great conversations with Carter Laren from Unsafe Space. But let's quickly go to Karen in Maryland, 202-521-1320. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind?
Hi there. I thought you dissed me because you hadn't taken the call yet. But anyway, I'm not trying to do an advertisement or a commercial. But have you heard of the film, Dinesh D'Souza's film, 2,000 Mules? Do you have a comment about it?
No, I haven't. I was talking to somebody, I'll be talking to them soon, who's worked with Dinesh D'Souza. I've seen a number of his films, one at a premiere in D.C., but not that one. What's that one about, Karen?
Well, it's basically, it's a representation or unreported stuff about the 2020 election. And, you know, I'm not trying to discuss that to death, but I just wondered if you had an opinion of it, or how about, can you commit to either watching it or giving us an opinion about it, like, you know, within the next year?
Well, no, I won't commit to it because I don't like to commit to things I don't know if I'll be able to do. I don't watch a hell of a lot of stuff, and for a variety of reasons. But I don't watch very many things. I don't even watch films for pleasure very much anymore. And I feel somewhat badly about that. And I'm trying to get myself more on a schedule. Let me ask you this, Carter Laren. How many movies do you watch? Just in general.
You know,
are you a big film watcher?
I'm not a big film watcher by nature, but I have a daughter, and we do like a family movie night every week. So I watch a movie every week at this rate. You know, a lot of them are more kids movies or whatever. As she's grown up, it's been a little bit more interesting. But I'm not, you know, outside of that, I wouldn't be watching a lot of movies.
And do you enjoy the kids movies?
This. No,
honest,
I mean sometimes, but in general, no. You know, it's more family time than anything else. But I have seen a couple of Dinesh D'Souza's films, or at least one of them. But I haven't seen the one that the caller is referring to.
Well, Dinesh D'Souza also, I've seen a number of his films. I like. Here's what I like. I'm going to do a little skit for you, Carter. This is my impression of a producer on a Dinesh D'Souza film. Ready? Because I've seen every Dinesh D'Souza film I've seen. Okay. You should be a little bit. Okay, ready? Hey, Dinesh, we're gonna go shoot the B-roll of you reading things at the library. Try to look thoughtful. Have you noticed that? There's a lot of shots of Dinesh.
There's a lot of profile shots of Dinesh thinking deeply about something. Yes.
That's right. And that's why, for me, I couldn't, as you know, because I carry heavy equipment. I've got my own damn cameras and stuff like that. And it would be hard for me to say, okay, whoever I'm working with, or just me, now it's the time for me to look thoughtful.
Yeah, but I guess if you make movies, you got to get over that. I think you got to just. I don't like it either. I don't like self-promotion or anything, but you know, it's something you got to do and get over it. So I guess he's got to. I don't know. Karen, do you like when that's on? Is that a good part of his documentaries? Does it make it more compelling?
I'm sorry. What song are you referring to?
We're referring to the shot that I've seen in every Dinesh D'Souza film, and Carter picked up on it. It's the shot of Dinesh looking thoughtful. You've noticed that in his films, right? There's lots of cutaways to him. Like, so I think sometimes, is he literally rubbing his chin sometimes, Carter? Is that possible?
I can't tell if that's my imagination, but that's the mood that he evokes, nonetheless.
Yes. What do you think of that when you see Dinesh D'Souza deep in thought, Karen?
I find all of his films worthwhile to watch, worth my time, which is, you know, not what I can say about every film or, you know, every radio slot that I find him to be worthwhile, and sometimes, and I also find it worthwhile to be honest with you, to sit there with a pen and paper and make notes while his films are going along. But you want me to just give it to you is, don't take offense to this, But a lot of times what I get disappointed by when I see film credits is filmmakers that have married young. Because when I was in my 20s, I wasn't jealous of those who were already married. I wondered what the hell their problem was and why they got married so young. So that's what I can say about him. I'm not sure how young he was when he got married, but I get disappointed by that a lot. The people that I think, would marry when they're older actually got married quite young. I'm sorry if I spoil your day by saying that.
Well, it didn't spoil my day. So if I got married young, I ended that marriage like 20 years ago. And then here's what it was, Carter. My first wife, I married 2 weeks after we met.
Oh, that's impressive.
Right. So
how
from
old
the
were
night
you?
Early 20s, 23, something like that, 24. So from the night, that's changed, Mom. So from the night we met, it was 2 weeks before we got hitched in Reno. 2 weeks. Now, my second wife, I knew we had 2 kids before we got married. I didn't rush into marriage with the second wife. We, in fact, delayed it a bit. Like I said, we had 2 kids beforehand. And you know what? Yep. Neither one of them worked out. So what I've learned is there's no rule. That's what I've learned. You can get married young or old, or you can wait or not wait. There's no telling. And I know people would like there to be a rule that don't do this and you're safe. But sorry, I don't think anyone's ever safe, period. There's you can always look back at the wrong choices, but there's nothing that guarantees success. What say you, Carter?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and we don't have to get into a super deep discussion about it, but I think one of the failures of American culture in the past couple of generations is we've had both fathers and mothers have stopped being able to give, or at least just decided to stop giving, decent advice to their children about how to pick a long-term relationship, how to find a spouse. And so I got married even younger than you at first, so that didn't last long either, but I really had no idea what I was doing, and no one was really clear with me about, hey, this is what it's going to be like. These are the issues that are going to crop up. This is what you really should be looking for, not this other thing. And so I think young men especially, I don't know about women, but I know young men especially, I feel like at least they really could use a healthy dose of advice about what to look for in a spouse and what kind of stuff is a cool, shiny object for a year and then isn't really going to work out in the long run. And not that I know the answer, but I certainly know some red flags that I didn't know before.
Well, I would like to think, but I don't. I would like to think maybe I do, but I don't. And here's what it is. Part of it is that I think everybody's got all kinds of red flags if you're looking for them. Does that make sense? That anybody, if you look close enough, you're going to go, well, that's where the problem could be eventually. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. But I will say there's a book, and I forget the exact title, but you'll know the author as soon as I say it. It's by Nathaniel Branden, and I think it's called The Art of Romantic Love or the Something of Romantic Love, something like that. And I think he has a pretty good model for what kind of matters in terms of sticking together and what matters in terms of kind of excitement. I think he actually does a pretty good job giving advice there. The one piece of advice I wish I had really understood was the understanding and knowledge that there is this period of limerence, and it can last for a year, it can last for a few years, but eventually being in a relationship is a choice. And it comes down to being like a choice because your feelings do really ebb and flow over time. And you are going to have times, and those could be months long even, where it doesn't feel good, you're bored, or you're not happy, or whatever it is, you're discontent. And I think part of being in a long-term relationship is making that choice that, like, I've committed to this, and instead of looking for something else or deciding it's over, instead of giving up, I'm going to put the effort in to figure out what's wrong or how to reinvigorate this. And as someone who did give up, I can say one thing that people in that state never really fully appreciate is the value of shared experience. If you've been with someone for years, it's easy to forget and not pay attention to the level of intimacy that's grown just because you know each other so well. And that's not something that should be thrown away lightly. But I don't think it's appreciated very much. I think people throw it away when they get bored or when something else, comes along or they're discontent or whatever, and they don't realize the cost of ending the relationship. They think all they see is the pain, and they don't miss the intimacy until it's gone. And you can't get that back quickly with anyone.
Since we're on the topic, let me say something that I think is going to be somewhat controversial, certainly with some people, but I've been thinking about lately. I don't think the standard that people should strive for is longevity in relationships. Let me explain. In other words, lots of things in this life don't last very long. In fact, if you think about the whole ebb and flow of the seasons, it's a cycle of birth, death, rebirth, right? Spring, winter, summer, etc. Why would people think that relationships, I'll put it like this, if you get a good year with somebody, take the good year. That was good. And don't assume, I think one good year is better than 3 mediocre years, probably. And I think it's entirely possible that two people could be really good for each other for a year, let's say, and then not be good for each other after that year. Their expiration date hits. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You can't tell when you're in it. But you see what I'm saying, Carter? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it's not as controversial to me as it might be, but I mean, I do agree with you that the end of a relationship shouldn't necessarily be seen as a failure. But I guess this is going to sound so not romantic, and it's weird because I am romantic at heart in many ways. But I think there is a very it's not even a romantic value necessarily, but a very satisfying and comforting and just altogether self-actualizing value in having someone who has been with you for a really, really long time. And that doesn't necessarily mean, so when I think of a relationship, I don't think that it always has to be in this beautiful eros. It doesn't have to be always in this lustful, loving thing. In some ways, it's a business partnership for life. And I think that's kind of okay. I'm actually not against people who have, this is controversial, I'm not against people who have open marriages or alternate sexual practices or whatever. I think I totally understand the mode of saying, like, look, this is someone who shares very deep philosophical values about life and someone who I trust deeply and I want to be with in a partnership sense for the rest of my life. But, it's not always romantic and wanting some more fulfillment there. I don't think it works as easily as some people think it does, and I'm sure it's more difficult than I'm making it out to be. But I'm much more open to alternate relationship lengths, styles, types, whatever, so long as people are being keeping their long-term interest at mind and not giving up on something, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, although sometimes you need to get rid of the baby, too. Sometimes you just need to go, you know what? I got to return this baby to the orphanage or whatever the equivalent is. By the way, I do think kids, on a serious tip, I do think kids changes it a little bit because
absolutely.
I think that having an open relationship, and I've had them, is trickier when you've got kids around all the time. And I think the kids should take precedence over the relationships at that point. Because I do think otherwise, I saw Jordan Peterson, another Canadian psychologist, we were talking about Nathaniel Brandon, who's Canadian, who Carter, he was your therapist, you knew Nathaniel Brandon.
Yeah, he was my therapist, yeah.
And I mentioned that I was at a couple of his lectures, and then I talked to Barbara Brandon on the phone a couple times when I was much younger. And by the way, here's the thing. Knowing what I know about the Nathaniel Branden Ayn Rand relationship, I'm not sure that was a screwed up relationship. The novelist philosopher Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, was older and married, and she decided to begin an affair with a much younger, NB was like 30 years younger than she was, but she was in her 50s.
Like that. Yeah.
Right. And she dedicated Atlas Shrugged to him. If it used to be that if you buy Atlas Shrugged, it was dedicated to Nathaniel Branden. Later, they broke up, and it did not go well. And she lied to her closest associates about whether she had been going with Nathaniel, which I thought was pretty gross of her, personally.
Yeah.
She was asked about it at one lecture, and she just said, he's not my type. And it got a laugh from the audience, and she moved on to the next question. But that was a lie. He was her type. And I thought that her lying to her own audience about that, it's even if she wanted to say, you know what, it's my business, I'm not going to talk about it, everyone would have known the answer at that point. But still, I would have respected that more. That was really disappointing to me that Ayn Rand did that. What did you must know that incident, Carter. What did you think about that?
I mean, obviously I don't think alive at that time, but yeah, I mean, I look, like everyone, I'm not a worshiper of her as an entire human being. I think she had a lot of great points and she was very smart, and I agree with a lot of what she said, but of course she had flaws and she was wrong on some things just like anyone else. And I think with respect to relationships, I think that I don't think she fully was integrated. I don't think she fully accepted her. So she had her theory on sex was almost puritanical in some sense, which is weird for an atheist, but it was like almost this puritanical kind of, and it's also weird for someone who writes about rape scenes. But she had this very strict philosophical idea of the kind of person you desire to have sex with. It says something about you, and there's very strict interpretations of people's sexual practices. So I think she had desires that were not in line with her own philosophy, and I think she didn't want to examine those because it was uncomfortable. And I think as a result, she lashed out at people who pointed out or even got close to revealing the contradiction there.
Well, in novel Atlas Shrugged, I'm going to get this quote not exactly right, but there's the Francisco quote where he said, show me what a man finds sexually attractive and I'll tell you everything about him psychologically. Or something.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And that quote is a recipe for psychological messed upness. I don't know how to put it. But
dysfunction.
First off,
yes.
Right. If you say to somebody, tell me what somebody finds sexually attractive, and I'll tell you what they value. For some people, they value big old boobies. I'm just saying. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's a physical element to it that people find.
Yes.
Because obviously, there's a physical element that people find sexually attractive. That is one of those things. So what does that say about you psychologically?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think this is I've written about this. This is something that she got wrong. And she got it wrong because she believed in a tabula rasa psychology. She believed that you were a complete blank slate upon birth, and it was your philosophy ultimately that determined all of your emotions and desires. And we now know scientifically that roughly 50% of your personality disposition is genetic, which means it's completely out of your control. And the rest of it, we're not really sure how to influence, but we definitely know that early childhood experiences have an impact. And so she's the kind of person, though, Lee, that would have said, whether you like big boobs or butts or whatever, was some sort of statement about your philosophy, like what color you like anything would have been a statement about your philosophy. And so because that's just ridiculous, and because she had this really misunderstanding of psychology and the interplay between psychology and philosophy, she viewed emotions as 100% derived from philosophy, and I think philosophy can affect your emotions, and I've had that experience as my philosophy has changed over the years. But it's certainly not 100%. It's less than 50%. I think it's mostly driven by stuff that you may never be able to control. It might be early childhood, it might be genetics or whatever. And so I don't think that I think you can't be quick to judge what people find attractive. And she was very quick to judge that.
Yes, and in fact, back in the old NBI days, the Nathaniel Branden Institute days, that would be in the 60s, 70s, a little bit, early 70s. There was a guy. Had you heard the story about the guy who he was going to a lot of NBI meetings, and it turned out he was gay, and he ended up killing himself? Did you hear about that story?
I didn't hear this one. No.
Yes. So this is, again, because you know some of the people who I know, and like I said, I've been in Ayn Rand's apartment. I knew Leonard Peikoff. I knew Harry. I knew Peter. I knew those people back when I was a teenager. And so some of this stuff was basically, it was, who's the other psychologist? Alan.
Oh, I forget. Not Gottlieb. That's the other guy.
Gottlieb.
Is that him? Okay.
Yes, that's it. Yes. There was a psychologist who was also an acolyte of Ayn Rand's. And apparently, therapy, when your patients end up committing suicide, that may be a sign your therapy is not going well. Does that make sense? So,
yep.
He'd almost guilted the guy about being gay to the point where the guy ended up killing himself. And it was profoundly disturbing to a lot of people in that circle who weren't gay. They were just empathetic human beings. And they were like, there's something weird there. So there was that going on. And that aspect of things, I think, unfortunately, really affected a lot of people. People that I knew, even in the 80s, were affected by a lot of the Ayn Rand's. I'll put it like this. When people discover Ayn Rand for the first time, maybe they read The Fountainhead or something like that, or Atlas, or they hear about her through the band Rush, they read Anthem or something like that. It's so profound an experience for them. It changes their view of the world in a lot of ways. And since they're re-assimilating themselves to the world, they may go along for a ride on some of this other stuff, like we talked about the way she viewed sex, for instance. And I understand why they do that, because no one hands you a pamphlet and says, hey, watch out, she's wrong here. You know what I'm getting at, Carter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you read her at first, she makes a lot of brilliant points, and she can be transformative, and so you then tend to defer to her on everything. And of course, that doesn't make any sense. She wasn't an expert on everything, and she had real flaws. There's a Murray Rothbard skit that you can find on YouTube somewhere, I think, where he does this skit about what it was like to be in her inner circle, and it's hilarious because they're judging him for not smoking, I think, because smoking, there's some philosophic symbol about how great smoking was, and that was kind of came from Rand. And
yes,
and when I was young and first started to get involved I was involved in the Ayn Rand Institute really early on. I'm obviously no longer, but a lot of the younger, I would say, more stable people who were like me, that were coming and looking at it, but not drinking all of the Kool-Aid. I mean, we used to joke with each other that, like, don't tell anyone that you don't like Rachmaninoff, because liking Rachmaninoff means that you're an evil person to the core. Or if you don't like him, you're an evil person to the core. And all good people love Rachmaninoff. But I mean, and it was kind of a joke, but there's some seriousness to this. There was really that kind of it's really rigid standards for aesthetics.
And Rachmaninoff, Carter, when Carter's mentioning Rachmaninoff, he's 100% right, specifically about that too. Because again, I remember those days, because I knew a lot of those people, and in that transition period, right around the time David Kelly got kicked out, I was around then, and it's very interesting. But anyway, coming up right after this short break, Ford Fisher from News to Share. Ford goes around, covers protests, although Rod was implying that he's now bourgeoisie earlier, right, Rod? Rod's not here to defend himself. That's fine. Ford Fisher will be with us right after this short break on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want to record.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Joining us now, someone we've not spoken to for a while, so let me say Happy New Year to the great videographer and journalist Ford Fisher from News to Share. Hey, Ford, how you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me on again. Happy New Year.
Good. Yeah, of course. And let me do the 70s presidential intro. We are joined by Carter Laren, who's co-hosting with us now. So I'll say Ford, Carter, Carter, Ford. See how that works? Ford,
nice.
Howdy,
Carter. Ford. Good to meet you.
Hi. Nice to meet you as well.
I realized that early in the show, that when I've got two guys, both with first names that were last names of U.S. presidents in the 70s, it's kind of funny to go, here's Ford and Carter. But I'm talking about their first names.
Yeah, I'm a little bit embarrassed about which one I am, although I don't know that Ford was much better, so.
I don't know. How do you like the name Ford, Ford?
Village. I think it's a great nickname. I think it's a good alliteration with my last name, so I'm quite happy with my name, but I don't often compare it to the president nor the automobile.
Oh, there we go. Now,
what about the guy from the Douglas Adams book, from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Or Prefect.
Yeah, Prefect. I remember, yeah, some people used to bring that up in high school. I think that's probably the most affectionate comparison.
Because it's one of the few uses of Ford as a first name. Ford Prefect from Hitchhiker's Guide is one of the first uses of that as a first name that I'd ever heard, and still is, aside from you, Ford. Although Ford Fisher is a better name than Ford Prefect, I must say. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever done the math on how many protests, news events you've covered? Do you know what that number is, Ford?
It's a good question. I have done the math on that, like, vaguely. And so, like, in some cases, a protest will yield more than one YouTube video. But, like, I believe I'm currently at about, like, 1,500 YouTube videos. So probably, like, I've attended something like 1,200 protests.
Yeah, that's a lot. Now, we've got, at the end of the hour here, we've got Austin Pelley, who's up in Ottawa right now. And I was thinking about that. There's, to me, two places to be in the world right now if you're covering news events. One of them's in Ottawa. The other one would be in Ukraine, I would say, maybe the Donbass. But do you view the world that way, Ford, where you go, I should be here right now? And you point to a globe.
Yeah. I mean, I had some other stuff going on this month, which is why I didn't personally go to Canada. But I did have a freelancer in Ottawa for a few days, and I then actually also had a freelancer at the Super Bowl, where there was a DHS memo claiming that there's a possibility that there could be a copycat trucker convoy movement beginning at the Super Bowl. There were some vaccine hesitant and anti-mandate type people outside the Super Bowl, but not a trucker convoy. So I had people covering both of those situations for me, and then we actually released a story last night on Matt Taibbi's Substack about that movement, about those two movements and their relationship.
So let me ask you something. Because you've covered so many protests, up close and personal, being on the ground, do you get a spidey sense about where things are going that the normal civilian does not have? In other words, because I started to get this when I was covering a lot of protests towards the end of the period, where I started to know, okay, at the front of the protest, we're going to have the union people. Then the black bloc will be at the back, and that's when the windows will start getting smashed and that kind of thing. Do you start to get a sense of where these protests are going, Ford, having covered so many?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that you really get your finger on the pulse of kind of what the most passionate of any given movement is thinking, right? The most emotional, the most engaged folks are the people who are actually going to go out on the street and protest over something. So, I remember that as things were building up toward January 6th, like, I think for people who, like, watched it, just on the news, it might have taken them really by surprise, like, how could this kind of thing happen? But, like, those months before it, like, in my mind, it was, like, incredibly obvious in a way that it was building up to something like that, even if not exactly how it was. So I'm happy to publicly say, like, right now, I feel like there's actually kind of a sense that people have that things are sort of back to normal, like in the last year and a half or so. And I think that, in a way, protesting has subsided a little bit in the United States, both because Joe Biden is perhaps a less divisive character. Then obviously Trump ignited a lot of activism and passion, both for him and against him. But I think that right now, when I do actually talk to people, like, a lot of the same angers that existed during the Trump era are really still there. And so my personal opinion is that probably when the presidential election season heats up, especially if Trump runs again, that a lot of that stuff's going to come to the surface. Like, I really think that, like, the way that, like, the second half of 2020 went and the very beginning of 2021, it could be well worse than that in a couple of years from now.
Okay, and I'll ask you about that and where we are now in a second. But let's throw it over to Carter Laren. Carter, do you have a question for Ford Fisher?
I was actually going to ask about where we are now in terms of, I mean, I've heard about this People's Convoy that's scheduled, I think, to leave California on February 23rd. And I've heard about a convoy to save America, I think, that was supposed to leave Tennessee. I don't know if that happened or is happening. And I think they eventually were also going to go to D.C. Are we going to see something in the next month here that's anywhere near as impactful as what's happening in Canada?
The short answer is I doubt it. So I certainly am going to cover whatever happens. But, they first said this about the Super Bowl event, and people did indeed show up. Some had Canadian flags, but they didn't have trucks, right? I think that the situation that happened in Canada was very specific, where you have people who own their truck, like their truck is their business, and then the restrictions are making it so that if they're not willing to to sort of follow the guidance, like getting the vaccine or doing the tests, whatever, that they truly are there in Canada with a truck that they can't use to do their business. Therefore, they're kind of the prime candidate to go participate in a protest like that. I don't believe that there's as many people in that situation in the United States. So there's plenty of people who are against various vaccine restrictions. There were thousands of people here for the event in January in Washington, D.C. So I'm not saying that a movement couldn't materialize, but I think a truckers' movement in the United States is fairly unlikely because it does not have the very specific set of kind of parameters that caused the Canadian one to show up.
Now, I will say something, though, about that. I see Americans who hate Justin Trudeau as much and in a similar way that they hated Barack Obama, let's say. He's the equivalent of that, where they view him as an effete, slightly feminine liberal. That's the way they view him, right? And I see that anger towards Justin Trudeau by Americans who don't even know much about him. They just don't like the guy. Have you noticed that kind of thing, Ford?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this happens, I think, sometimes with various, like, international, like, I guess I'll say, like, not socialist, but, like, liberal characters. I mean, I kind of remember there being, to some extent, similar sentiments about Emmanuel Macron, like, in France, around the same time that he was running against a woman who was sort of seen as kind of a Trump of France, right, Marine Le Pen. And so, like, that kind of passion, Trump calling that woman a tough cookie, whereas he kind of made fun of Macron, right? Like, I think that those sorts of situations cause Americans to kind of, like, bunch them into the things that they dislike, at least from the conservative perspective.
That's a good point. Now, do you think that Canada, what people are seeing up in Ottawa, is because I'm seeing it, I think it's having a big impact and could affect events here in the U.S., where they're getting inspired by what they're seeing. And I think if they start seeing truckers pulled out of their trucks by the Canadian police, by the Mounties of the OPP up there, do you think it's got that potential, Ford Fisher, before we're out of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could be inspiring things that happen in the United States. It certainly ignites the kind of passion. It obviously has had an impact there enough so that Trudeau is calling for emergency powers for himself. You know, even the Canadian Civil Liberties, the equivalent of the American Civil Liberties Union of Canada, I think the Canadian Civil Liberties Association or something like that, even they kind of like called out against it based on the idea of these emergency powers. So clearly it has Trudeau nervous about what it means for Canada. And again, that sort of thing could easily happen in the United States. So me saying I don't think it will look like a truckers' convoy in the United States does not mean that what's happening in Canada can't inspire similar movements or parallel movements other places. I just don't think it'll look the same.
So we're out of time. Ford, thanks for joining us. We're going to get you back on again very soon. Ford Fisher, everyone, from News 2 Share. That's number 2. Right, Ford?
Yep, that's right. Thank you for having me.
There we go. Ford Fisher, everyone. Coming up after this short break, Austin Pelley, live from Ottawa. We'll get the latest on that press conference that the Canadian Civil Liberties Group held. And we'll see if any truckers have been pulled out of their trucks yet. Coming up in the final 15 minutes of The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know.
But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
We are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Want to thank Fort Fisher once again for joining us, getting a quick chat with him. Now, up in Ottawa, Canada, the co-host of Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly, Austin Pelly, once again. Hey, Austin, how you doing?
Good, Lee. How are you?
I'm groovy, man. So I like you, Austin. I like you so much, I said, let's just have Austin for 15 minutes because I didn't want to subject you to that. You've been good enough to be on the show with us about an hour this week so far. I figure that's plenty for any human being. So, Carter, let me ask you a real quick question, then I'll quickly throw it over to you for Austin Pelly up in Ottawa. So what's the mood up? Is a broad question for you, Austin. What's the mood up there now? Yesterday, it seemed like the Canadians were amassed to invade Canada anytime. They were handing out leaflets yesterday. Did any clashes with the cops come today? What happened? And what's the mood up there, Austin Pelly, in Ottawa?
Yeah, listen, Lee, it's a good thing your producer, your intrepid producer, called me, and your tech called me, because I totally forgot, because I'm standing right here in the middle of the streets, and I just witnessed one of the first arrests of today, the first one I've seen, definitely. About 40 different cops were escorting this one guy to a car. He started to fight back a bit, and by that I mean squirm a lot. He didn't actually try to assault any of the cops. He did squirm a lot. They dropped him a couple times. They ended up picking him up physically, like about 5 of them. And then they escorted a path to a squad car that just drove up right in front of us, and it was directly in front of our face. So we got some footage of that, and then you called.
Okay, well, we're glad you're able to join us. And to see, what was the reaction of the crowd as they were leading this guy off? Were people catcalling them, or?
So it was about a 50-50 split, maybe a 60-40 split. About 40 of them were trying to guilt the cops and say, like, hey, he's just standing for freedom, and I hope you think about this when you go back to your hotel room tonight. And then 60% of them were saying, hey, man, don't fight, brother, don't fight, let them take you. Remember to stay peaceful, let's stay peaceful. So yeah, mix of both.
There we go. So let me throw it over to Carter Lair. Do you have a question for Austin Pelly up in Ottawa?
Well, I don't know if you've seen anyone's financial accounts be attacked yet. As that, I mean, that's the thing I'm most worried about. That Trudeau mentioned that they're going to have the power to basically. They told banks, seize any money from anyone that might be helping. Go ahead. You're not liable in civil court. Have you seen people lose their bank accounts?
Well, I have not been shown the physical bank accounts. I have been shown some screenshots here and there of people who haven't been able to access it. I know that is definitely one of the things that the majority is more worried about. And if we were to say call the convoy the minority, then all those supporters who didn't decide to physically show up, this will also affect them. I know people are very worried about that. And keep in mind, Trudeau didn't say, hey, you guys have the power to do this. He said you have the duty to do this. So if if you find someone, if you monitor an account and you know that it's going to a convoy, if you know it's going to the trucker on either end, your duty is to freeze both of those accounts, where it's sending from and where it's sending to. So yeah, you're right to be worried about that.
And what happened with the banks last night? Oh, sorry, Lee.
Sorry?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Carter.
I was just asking what happened with the banks last night. There was some news on Twitter that there's a bunch of bank outages for Canadian banks. Was this related at all? Do you know?
Yeah, it was. So essentially what happened was just like the Great Depression, when people started to hear that bank accounts were being frozen and stuff, they rushed to the banks. They were trying to get as many of their funds out as possible. They tried to check their finances. And so what they said was the servers couldn't handle that many people checking all at once. Also, the banks couldn't give out that much money all at once. Therefore, they kind of just shut it all down. And then they blamed it on a server issue. But undoubtedly, these are related. But, same thing. Like, the government will not give the convoy, they won't give them anything that they've actually done, credit for anything they've actually done. They say it's for ulterior motives. So that, while they said it was not specifically from the convoy, I mean, it had to do with a lot of convoy supporters and convoy receivers of those monetary funds that either overflooded the system and the servers actually did crash, or they just didn't want to cause a mass panic and pulling out of the banks.
Now, let's play this clip, by the way. We have a clip about this. It's not just your money, it's also your Bitcoin that may be in jeopardy. Let's hear from Ukrainian nationalist Christina Freeland, and high government official. And when I say Ukrainian nationalist, I mean her grandfather was a Nazi who was collaborating with the Nazis in a Jew-hating newspaper in Poland, and that's established. I've seen the stuff. It's 100% established. Christina Freeland, who, by the way, was part of getting Petro, this harkens back to when we had Mark Sabota on the show. Part of the reason that Petro Poroshenko's back there is Christina Freeland was brokering it. But she has something to say about Bitcoin, too. Not just she's from a family of Nazis, but she is, and lied about. But let's hear her talking about Bitcoin now. Here's Christina Freeland. Hit it, Saul.
You're confirming that accounts have been frozen, both personal and corporate, but you're not releasing the information. And the actual follow-up is, I'm just wondering whether the bank accounts will be targeted of individuals who donated to the Give, Send, Go and the GoFundMe campaigns. Are they considered designated people under the Emergencies Act, meaning that their credit cards could be cut and financial services are targeting them as well?
Okay, so the names of both individuals and entities, as well as crypto wallets, have been shared by the RCMP with financial institutions, and accounts have been frozen, and more accounts will be frozen. Crowdfunding platforms and payment service providers have started the registration process with FinTrack. In terms of the specifics on whose accounts are being frozen, you now have the regulations. The financial service providers have those regulations as well, and they, working with law enforcement, will be making the operational decisions.
Well, there we go. This is Christina Freeland, and I'm sure her Nazi collaborating grandfather, Michael Chomiak, who hid on a farm up in Canada for years while the Polish authorities were looking for him, would be very proud of you, Christina. So, Austin, how concerned, let me ask you this. Did you happen to catch, it was at the same time as our show a couple hours ago, the Canadian Civil Liberties Union said they were doing a big speech. Did you hear much about that, Austin?
Yes, I did. I did catch quite a bit of it, yeah.
And what were they saying there?
It was just back and forth fighting about it. And, I mean, what you would pretty much expect. I mean, there are clear liberals for the physical removal and end to this convoy. And then there are clear conservatives that are not as well. And surprisingly, that bridge wasn't as suspended between the two as you might expect. There weren't many liberals going over to the conservative side and said, no, they have the right to be here. And there weren't many conservatives going over and say, no, it's time to end this. So, yeah, it's definitely a divisive issue here. And, the Trudeau's guys and the government here has to break this up before that 7-day vote comes in, because anything could happen. It's expected to pass in the House of Commons with MPs, but anything could happen by then. So that's why he's trying to get action done now. He's also trying to get action done before this weekend. We actually had Steve Bell, the new interim chief of police, came out on a press briefing today and said this weekend will not look like any other weekend, basically saying that while he can't make any guarantees as to how many trucks, if any, get towed, he can say that the police will take decisive, imminent action before this weekend, but no guarantees on what that means for numbers-wise and all that.
Okay, Carter, let me throw it to you. We only got a couple minutes left with Austin Pelley. Take it, Carter.
Well, I mean, I guess I want to drill down on what the Canadian Civil Liberties Association said, because I thought I saw a tweet a couple days ago where they basically were arguing that the federal government has not met the threshold for invoking the Emergencies Act, and they articulated why. I also saw another lawyer by the name of Iwa Krajewska or something like that, a civil liberties attorney in Canada, make a similar argument. Has there been legal challenges? Is anyone saying like, hey, you haven't met the threshold for this act? I mean, the last time this act was invoked, by the way, was I think in 1970 by Trudeau's father for like actual bombings and terrorism. So this is not a normal thing.
Yeah, so the last time it was enacted, this is the first time it's been enacted under the name Emergencies Act. The last time it was enacted, I believe it was under the Wartime Act. And that was Pierre Trudeau when a British royal diplomat was abducted and held hostage in Quebec. That was the last time it happened. Yes, there has been arguing back and forth. But the thing is, if he successfully sells the narrative that this is an illegal convoy that is detrimenting, and they love to push, they're calling for an end to government. Well, that's really not what the majority of these people are calling for. If he is able to successfully project them as anarchists, then it is constitutional. The problem is that anarchist definition has been hotly debated. And yes, 100%, no matter what happens after this, there will be challenges in court. That is absolutely for sure, especially because whatever Trudeau does here before it gets confirmed by the House of Commons is essentially subject to be ruled unconstitutional after they vote on it, depending on how that goes and whatever acts the police make in the meantime.
Now, Austin, could you tell, you were saying earlier in the segment that you literally witnessed an arrest happen right in front of you guys. What was that about? Yes. Do you have any idea what the guy was arrested for?
I don't know what he was arrested for. I was walking up to join the main convoy participation because that's where the biggest police presence is, and they were carrying him along the way. But I will say it happened very, very closely to where I got because not many people had caught wind of this. And then as soon as I stopped to pull out a camera, many people started to do the same. That didn't. So I didn't witness it at the time, at least with that arrest. I expect many more to happen today. And I will be right there for what sets that off.
Okay, and then we will leave you by saying, stay safe, Austin. Great job. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, go ahead.
Hope I don't spend the night in a Canadian prison.
No, there could be worse things. You could be in Turkey. But I'm just saying,
True.
Canadian prison, at least, whatever, it gets some back bacon. Austin Pelley from Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelley can be heard every morning, 7 to 10 a.m., right here on Radio Sputnik, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Carter, fantastic conversation. Great job co-hosting as usual. Did you enjoy yourself, Carter?
I did, as always. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. Great conversation with Carter. Tomorrow, Frosty Friday. We'll be back tomorrow. Don't forget, we're off Monday because it's President's Day. What used to be called George Washington's birthday, but someone got mad at Washington. I don't know what happened exactly. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow to close off the week on the best damn radio show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. There's a report in the Washington Post. Ukraine and Moscow-backed separatists trade accusations of shelling in potential eastern flashpoint. Moscow expels senior U.S. diplomat. Ukraine and Russian-backed separatists accused each other today of violating a ceasefire in the eastern part of the country, a potential flashpoint in what